And first of all, it is a distinct honor and a great privilege to take part in the distinguished academic gathering. And today I will be presenting on the topic linking ancient Iranian philosophy, Islamic tradition, and Sufism in Sohrawardi's language of the ant. And as you know, Sohrawardi, known as Sheikh al-Ishraq, is one of the most prominent philosophers of the Islamic Middle Age in Iran, and he authored numerous works on philosophy and mysticism. And to the best of my knowledge, his philosophical and mystical writings hold great significance in both Iranian and Islamic philosophical traditions and are marked by numerous innovations. And in Sohrawardi's intellectual system, we observe a profound interconnection between diverse philosophical traditions. And in my view, Sohrawardi was remarkably successful in harmonizing various intellectual frameworks, and more precisely, he was able to identify shared elements and common orientation among distinct systems of thought, and to incorporate them creatively into his own philosophical system. For example, in some of his philosophical works, such as Al-Mashari wal-Mutarahat and Al-Talwihat, he engaged with Abyssinian philosophy, both drawing upon its concepts and articulating his critical perspective. And in another of his major works, Hikmat al-Ishraq, he managed to synthesizing philosophical and mystical foundation, presenting them in a rigorously philosophical manner. And further, in Hikmat al-Ishraq, Sohrawardi draws upon the intellectual legacies of Plato, Aristotle, Avicenna, and ancient Iranian philosophy or Khosravani wisdom, blending them into a unique system that transcends the boundaries of each school. And in addition to what I have mentioned, Sohrawardi also composed several mystical and allegorical works, and many of which were written in Persian. These writings are not only significant from a literary perspective, but also, more importantly, hold deep ethical and mystical value. And through the use of symbolic narrative and allegory, he conveys profound metaphysical and mystical insights in a form that is both accessible and philosophically rich. And in these allegorical texts as well, one can discern the convergence of multiple intellectual traditions and diverse approaches, ranging from ancient Iranian tradition, Neoplatonic philosophy, to Islamic philosophy and Sufism. And these allegorical writings are, broadly speaking, mystical in nature, yet they also contain philosophical elements. And in these works, he managed to interacting different approaches, most notably the philosophical and the mystical, into a coherent and unified vision. And for example, in one of his book, Awaz-e Jibril, which is a mystical and allegorical treatise, Sohrawardi, in addition to presenting mystical foundations, also draws upon cosmological principles from the Peripatetic and Neoplatonic traditions. And similarly, in the language of the ant or Lughat Muran, which is the topic of my presentation, he refers to certain philosophical principles within the context of his mystical discussion. And to broach the subject, I would like to provide a general overview of the treatise. The language of the ant is one of Sohrawardi's mystical and allegorical work, as I mentioned earlier, composed in Persian. This treatise consists of 12 chapters, and it opens with a brief introduction that includes praise of God and eulogy for the Prophet of Islam, peace be upon him, and a statement explaining the reason for the composition of the work. And he presents the mystical themes and concepts of this treatise through narrative and allegory across its various chapters. 10 distinct stories are told within the 12 chapters, while 2 of the chapters, although they contain mystical insights are not structured as stories. In Sohrawardi's narrative, the main character are often well-known mystical figure. At other times, he uses animals as the characters in his allegorical tales. And important mystical concepts are presented in these treatises, and alongside these mystical points, the name of several significant figures are also mentioned. In addition, verses from the Holy Quran and several lines of poetry are included. As I mentioned earlier, some philosophical principles are also referenced. This indicates that in Sohrawardi's intellectual system, the mystical, philosophical, and Islamic approach are harmonized and brought into alignment. For instance, in the first chapter, Sohrawardi refers to the story of the ants who were discussing the original place of a drop of water and ultimately concluded that since water evaporate, its true place is above. In this chapter, Sohrawardi mentions a philosophical principle and stating that everything returns to its origin. And Rumi also says, we come from above, and to the above we shall return. And in addition, Sohrawardi cites verses from the Quran. From this chapter, we understand that the ant symbolizes wisdom and rational inquiry. In this chapter, mystical concepts are presented alongside a philosophical principle and verses from the Holy Quran, all conveyed through allegory. And in the second chapter, Sohrawardi presents another story in which the main characters are turtles. Unlike the ants, the turtles symbolize outward literalism. In this chapter as well, Sohrawardi refers to both mystical and philosophical elements, and he also mentions several important mystical figures. In the third chapter, the main characters are the Prophet Solomon and the nightingale. Here too, Sohrawardi draws upon mystical and Islamic elements. And furthermore, in the fourth chapter, the main character of the story is Khosrow, who possesses a Jam Jahannama, a cosmic cup that reveals the world. The fact is that this cup symbolizes divine knowledge and play a key role in these treatise and even in other works by Sohrawardi. And Khosrow, as its possessor, represents the one who holds the divine wisdom. In Ferdowsi's The Book of Kings, or Shahnameh in Persian, Khosrow is portrayed as a sage-like figure. Sohrawardi, in his other works, also refers to Khosrow as a virtuous and noble character. He even calls him Khosrow the Blessed or Khosrow al-Mubarak. The truth is, Khosrow is both a king and a philosopher from ancient Iranian tradition. And in ancient Iran, kings were expected to be philosophers. There were three main social classes in ancient Iranian society: the class of sage as a first level, and the class of guardians as a second level, and the class of artisans and farmers as a third level. This view is quite similar to Plato's classification of society in the Republic. And in this chapter, in addition to referring to this ancient Iranian figure as a possessor of divine knowledge, Sohrawardi also mentions a mystical figure, Junaid, and even quotes a line of poetry attributed to him. Islamic elements are also present in this chapter. Thus, in this chapter, he conveys a mystical teaching related to divine knowledge by linking together elements from ancient Iranian philosophy, Islamic philosophy or theology, and mystical traditions. In the remaining chapter as well, Sohrawardi presents his narrative through various characters or animals, each of which symbolizes a particular concept, and in each chapter, alongside mystical foundations, He also refers to Islamic elements. And the connection between mystical and the Islamic tradition in this book is clear, as numerous Islamic and mystical references are found throughout the text. However, the elements related to ancient Iran are more limited in this book. And for instance, as previously mentioned, one such element is the figure of Khosrow, yet in chapter 6, Sohrawardi also discussed the sun and sunlight. I would argue that the sun symbolizes light, and light is of central importance both in ancient Iranian philosophy and in Sohrawardi's Ishraqi philosophy. And in chapter 9 as well, Sohrawardi speaks of the sun. And to conclude my discussion, it is clear that the language of the ant by Sohrawardi is a mystical treatise, and the presence of elements related to Islamic tradition is also evident. Even if we pay attention to the title of the treatise and the story in the first chapter, we realize that the language of ant and the dialogue among the ants refers to Surah al-Naml in the Holy Quran. For this reason, the presence of Islamic elements in line with mysticism in this treatise is undeniable. Furthermore, Sohrawardi refers to well-known mystical figures who are regarded as prominent figures in Sufism, such as Junaid and Abu Talib al-Makki, and therefore I argue that there is a clear link between Sufism and the Islamic tradition in the treatise. At the same time, however, the elements related to ancient Iran are more limited. Nevertheless, despite their limited number, Sohrawardi does refer to three significant elements from ancient Iranian wisdom. The first is the figure of Khosrow, one of the most revered figure in ancient Iranian tradition, and possibly the term Khosrawani wisdom or Hikmat al-Khosrawani is related to him. And the second is the Jam Jahannama, the cosmic cup of Khosrow, which symbolizes divine knowledge. And the third is the element of the sun or light, which holds particular significance in Zoroastrian theology. And it can therefore be argued that in this treatise, Sohrawardi has established a connection between these three approaches, ancient Iranian wisdom, the Islamic tradition, and Sufism. And thank you very much for your time and patience.